Welcome to Native Calgarian and Mossy for listening. I'm your host, Michelle Robinson, speaking to you in Mohkinstsis in the Blackfoot Confederacy, home of the Niitsitapi, Tsuut'ina Dene, and the Yiharhi Nakota. I talk about history, current news, unheard news, book clubs, with special guests to give local or national issues a voice through an urban Satu Dene lens. My life's work will be to honor the voices of my ancestors and next generation with humor, love, and truth. Reconciliation is work, not performance. May we honor all Indigenous voices with that courage. Today is September 20th, 2024. Welcome to Native Calgarian. If you enjoy hearing and listening to Indigenous content by this Satu Dene woman, my Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for always showing your support. If you can't afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in comments or questions. Also, giving a review helps, whatever medium you're listening from. I have a YouTube channel where you can go and subscribe, and you can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts or my old ones, and just have a look on my pinned posts on social media for links as well. And always remember to share things you learned to your network. Oki, naganago me koche komaki, or Nara doga da de kots nagot tine siku saradi. My name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use they, them pronouns. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Great Bear Lake Tribe in Treaty 11 in Dullany. I am a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene Nation is uninvited to this area of Clinchotine Indahe in Satu Dene, meaning many big dog town, named after the Calgary Stampede. I was born in Calgary, or in Blackfoot, Mohkinstsis, as Michelle Elliott, an English name that has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. Acknowledging proximity to whiteness is important because the darker the skin, the more racism a person experiences in colonial spaces. My late great-grandfather is Milo Bewolf in Deline. His daughter is Alice and is now my late granny. My mom and I are Northern Slavey Dene, or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act and Post status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. Through my father, I am a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution, while having a Canadian Indian Act and Post status card. That's a colonial construct by Canadian policies meant to divide Indigenous peoples' inherent rights. Indigenous Two-Spirit, or the Indigenous 2S LGBTQ community, and Indigenous women are at the bottom of the Canadian socioeconomic ladder because of colonial trauma, imposed poverty, racism, gendered violence, and land theft. According to the 2023 Quality of Life Report from the Calgary Foundation, 31% of racialized Calgarians cannot find suitable employment. Babes, that's racism. I'm not a social worker, nor an elder, nor do I speak on behalf of all Indigenous, but I share my journey as a Dene mom, navigating this colonial, misogynistic, racist urban world in 2024. As a trauma-informed Dene woman who attempted to join harmful colonial parties, spent money to be at expensive conventions, left my home to travel to those conventions just to vote on incomplete policies that still allow colonial incarceration, denial of justice, denial of health services, racism, colonial trauma, and genocide of Indigenous and Black peoples. I have worked to continue reports to advocate for and attempt to work within these systems meant to harm me and my community. I think of all of this today, and I hope we honor the many Indigenous lives lost for this so-called country named Canada. I hope you see your role in the importance of stopping harm, and as a citizen, your role in reconciliation and as a treaty partner. Pride Month should never just be 1 month. It's important to understand the straight agenda and gendered violence was and is forced on these lands by Christian outsiders. Land acknowledgements are critical for creating a safer space for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as a guest and acknowledging your role as a treaty partner in a so-called time of reconciliation. Can they be performative? Yes. It's important land acknowledgements have meaning. Otherwise, you're just creating more harm. I encourage everyone to introduce themselves with an acknowledgement of their ancestors, their stories of displacement, how you perceive your role as a treaty partner, a citizen of Canada, a refugee, or other land displacement, so we as Indigenous peoples know how safe you are to be around. If you won't pronounce your local Indigenous nations' names, you won't say your pronouns, won't say your story of origin, won't acknowledge stolen lands, impose economic oppression, or your role in reconciliation. I determine how safe you are to be around my community, my family, and myself because we face the most colonial violence based on ignorance and worse, willful anti Indigenous biases. Understanding land acknowledgements and their importance really is Indigenous 101 because it immediately addresses colonialism, oppression dynamics, broken treaties, and lies taught today in Canadian schools nationally. That's why settlers and those who call themselves Native Calgarians or whatever town you're from, you show me you have no Indigenous 101 understanding. Jesse Winty's book, Unreconciled, explains a lot of this perfectly, as do many Indigenous authored books. Land Back is a movement that could save the planet from climate change created by colonialism, but it would be a part of a treaty partnership, part of meaningful reconciliation, honoring global initiatives like the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. As a former drafter, I would happy to teach you more about this. Just go to nativecalgarian.com for more. So today I want to welcome my friend Josh. Josh, how are you doing?
So great. I'm honored to be here. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing lovely. It's a kind of been a weird couple of days here in Calgary because of the like it went from extreme hot to extreme cold. Tonight we have a frost warning. Like it's just incredible
No.
how quickly the weather changed, hey?
I know, and I'm supposed to take a group of, I think, 10 children climbing in the mountains tomorrow, or not climbing, hiking in the mountains tomorrow. So, a little nervous about how the weather's going to be holding up, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. It should
Yeah,
be good.
good
What a
luck.
wonderful introduction. I love that. I feel like I need to introduce myself.
Yes, please do. Please introduce yourself, Josh.
I'm the artist formerly known as Josh de Groot. He him pronouns. Four Dutch grandparents who hadn't come over here following World War II. I would like to believe I'd never had the chance to ask them before they passed because I hadn't gone on this exploration of learning about colonization and what that meant and what my family played a part in. But I don't believe that my grandparents were actively wanting to pursue colonialism, but were fleeing World War II and all of the hardships that their family went through and accidentally perpetuated this horrible system.
Yeah.
Um, and because of my Dutch heritage, I have all the privilege. I am a white, straight, blondish, blue-eyed, 6'5" man. So
Yeah.
I am that's me, just privilege out the wazoo.
So then a lot of people might be asking, what in the hell is Michelle having this white guy on her podcast for?
Right? I
And
never thought I'd be asked.
I know, but part of the reason was because I wanted to talk about allyship.
Mm.
I was on TikTok and people were like missing you, and I'm like, oh my god, I miss him too. We should have him on the podcast. So for me, when we started talking about what would we talk about,
Mhm.
we're days away from September 30th, which is the day for truth and reconciliation. And some people have the day off. Some people are going to participate. Some people just are going to wear an orange shirt and think that's enough. So I thought it would be really great to have him come on because of his past. And like we actually met on the front lines of counter protesting hate against the 2S LGBTQ community. So that's how I got to know Josh in person. So I know like he knows a thing or two about allyship, and I'd like to try to say I do too. And with the Truth and Reconciliation National Day coming up, I just think it's really important for settlers to do a check in on themselves and ask themselves, what is allyship? What does that look like? And what am I willing to do? What haven't I done? What would I like to do? Maybe setting goals. I don't know what that looks like. So I just thought it would be really great to have Josh come on because as a person who's absolutely experienced hate and violence online, he understands what it's like to actually advocate for real as opposed to what I call performative. And performative would be something like, I support, and maybe the rainbow, but never go to Pride, never, stand up against hate against the queer community. Maybe they vote for hate against the queer community. So I think that when you start looking at intersectionalities like that and you start applying it to Indigenous, this was the important thing I thought we would talk about. So, Josh, do you want to talk a little bit about power, privilege? You kind of started there and talking about being a white guy in a position of power, and a position of privilege. And what does allyship really look like to you?
Uh, to me, the word ally is such a interesting word because it's a word that I would never use to describe myself, but I'm honored when someone else uses it to describe me, especially someone who's part of and represents a marginalized community. So for you to view me from that perspective, I really appreciate, and I've heard other people say that, and that means a lot to me, but it's never something that I would self-identify as. It feels, as the hip youth would say, it feels cringe to say, right? So like,
Yeah.
go out of your way to be an ally. I think that the way that allyship is seen, or the way that I would like to view it without tooting my own horn, is just trying your best to be as welcoming and open and loving a person as possible to everyone, no matter their walk of life, especially in things that don't affect you at all as a person, be that love, or be that who you are, or be that the color of your skin, and being willing to be open and actively participating in welcoming everyone is something that I guess makes me an ally and makes people identify me as someone who's an ally,
Mhm.
because they are able to, hopefully, for the most part, feel safe around me. Maybe we won't agree on everything. Maybe you like hockey and I like basketball and we'll fight about that. Or maybe our personalities will clash, but you will know that I will never go after you based on inherent characteristics about yourself that in no way affect me at all.
Mhm.
So to me, that's what allyship, I guess, is.
Yeah, for sure. So, I'm someone who identifies as straight and cis, and for me, that's you've encapsulated it really well for, why I would stand in the front lines for the queer community. I mean, these are people, and I talk about it on my show, especially for Two Spirit, the most marginalized people.
Mm-hmm.
BIPOC, QT BIPOC is somebody that is like so special yet so mistreated in our world. So, that's a part of that conversation of violence against Indigenous people. And so many people don't get it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so I've experienced a lot of racism within the queer community. What are some of your thoughts, your observations that you've seen about racism in general, not beyond the queer community, maybe the Indigenous lens, however you want to frame that? What kind of racism do you still see prevalent today?
The racism that I experience, again, because as someone who's not part of any marginalized group, I don't experience it firsthand, but you can kind of always see it on the periphery, right? You
Mhm.
might hear it as a joke. I play a lot of sports. I do a lot of typical straight guy bro stuff, hanging out with people, fishing, playing basketball, all of that stuff. And it's in just the little jokes. It's in those passive moments where I don't, I would like to think, but again, it's not something that affects me. So I'm probably being a little bit too generous sometimes. But it's in these moments, in these jokes, in these quick little asides that happen where someone might make a little comment or say a stereotype or something like that. And I go, okay, this is something that already most of the people I'm around, they know that I'm someone who it's not safe to speak that way around me because I'm going to speak up against you and we're going to have a few words and it's going to lead to some tense moments. So if you're speaking like this around me, what are you saying around other company, right? Who might be more tolerant of those intolerant views.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's the way that I experience it the most. Again, I don't have a firsthand experience of just interacting with people and being approached with racism because I am white and I look pretty darn white. Um, but I guess I see it. I think one of sorry, I'm just reflecting. I'm thinking about all these different things that I have seen though. A few years ago, I played on um, a basketball team that was 11 Indigenous men and then myself. And just one of the weirdest things that I had was I've got a really hot temper when I play basketball. And I normally get lots of technical fouls, which is essentially when you yell at the refs or yell at another player on the court and they give you a technical foul, the other team gets free throws. This is the first season of my entire life that I got zero technical fouls. And the 11 men on my team were much quieter than I was, but they still would chirp up every once in a while. But technical fouls were flying, and I never got one. And my behavior hadn't changed at all. And that was something that really clued into me in that moment where I was like, oh, why are the referees ignoring my chirps? Well, it's because they've got 11 other guys on the court who don't look like me that
Yeah.
they're paying more attention to. And so it was just this real aha moment that I could get away with saying whatever I wanted. But it's these things that seem so minor, right? But it has a building up and stacking effect, right? If you're going out for your one time a week where you hang out with your buddies and you play basketball for an hour and you're facing these little tiny moments in that 1 hour of relaxation, but then you're stacking it against the other 14 hours a day that you're awake and you're having all these little moments, you really start to feel that racism pile up on you, I'm sure.
Mhm.
Whereas I don't have to deal with that. I notice it for that 1 hour and then I'm back to my white community, my white family, and I don't
Yeah.
see that stuff.
Yeah, no kidding. Oh, there you go. Well, thank you for sharing that. For a lot of folks who may not think they're being homophobic or transphobic, does that look a lot the same as well?
Uh, Absolutely. Um, it's a it's a really interesting time to talk about that type of stuff and to see it. It's a really sad time. I I don't know. Sorry, sorry. There's just so much hatred and anger out there. I think that we're seeing it play out the most right now from a government perspective, and the way that they are actively making up these narratives and vilifying people who purely just want to exist in a way that affects nobody else, and wanting to pass laws against people who have existed since time immemorial, right? I remember as a kid reading a magazine about cultures in Asia where if there weren't enough men, women would go and they would live as men to meet the needs of the community, right? And that was something that was representing themselves. This isn't some new thing like a lot of our governments are trying to tell us, and that people in our communities are then echoing out. There's just this hatred that is being spouted out right now. And it's just something that I don't understand. I think that's part of a lot of where my allyship comes from. Is it something that just doesn't make sense to me? I just don't get why there's so much hatred and anger for. I will never understand the trans experience and being raised in a pretty like regressive Christian community and private Christian school that taught me some pretty hateful and homophobic things. It's probably going to be something that deep inside of me, because of my internalized homophobia and transphobia that was taught to me from a young age. I think trans people are always going to make me like think about it in a certain way that I can't quite control because that's the way my neural pathways have been designed. But at the same time, I am at a place as an adult that I can understand it has no effect on me. And it is someone living their most beautiful, valid form of life. And I think that that's wonderful. And I don't understand why we as a society or our governments are actively trying to harm people living their best experience at life. We have 80 years here on this planet. People want to be their best, most valid version of themselves. And we are constantly attacking them and making these marginalized people feel even worse. And I just don't get it. I just
Right.
don't get it.
Oh,
Sorry,
God.
I'm just rambling.
No, but I'm glad because I think it's important that people understand. I just recently found out I'm a little more neurospicy than I realized. So,
Mm-hmm.
if I struggle the same way, like, why would people do this? This makes no sense to me whatsoever. So it is actually really validating for me to hear you talk about it in these terms because like I just don't get it. Both my husband and I, like, we've unpacked this, like, what about a little bi? And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, we're not that, but we're not threatened by it either. So
Yeah.
I just think it's just a different type of, like a scared of something that you just don't understand. And, I feel like I grew up with this education, so I don't understand why everybody else is so far behind on it. But here we are. Here we are.
We
Um,
are.
Yeah. So I heard you kind of talk a little bit about how your brain works. So do you think at all about basically folks with disabilities that are struggling with anything in particular? And I'll just give you an example for me.
Mhm.
When I first met Kent Hare and I realized how inaccessible most places are, I just started to look at life in such a different way, how there should be wheelchair accessible everything. And now finding out I'm a little neurospicy, I was on the phone with a stupid Indian agent, and I'm like,
Mhm.
I have ADHD, so I just wanted to let you know at the start of this conversation. And what I should have said was, I have ADHD, so I'm going to interrupt to clarify regularly. And she, by the end of it, we weren't helping each other, and she was just saying,
Yeah.
"If you would let me finish," and I'm
Yeah.
like, "Okay, we're not communicating here." So it's kind of one of those things that I try to listen to other people and their point of view, but it's so hard to, try to understand where people are coming from in general. And then I thought, well, what is going on with this ADHD and autism? And I started to research that more and realizing got an official diagnosis for ADHD, but the autism one, they were saying, no, it's $5,000. So I don't think I'll ever find out for sure on that one at 47. It
Yeah.
is what it is. So, yeah, I just wanted to ask you, do you have anyone in your life that you think about when it comes to folks with disabilities?
So my background, the last 20 years, I've spent working with adults and children with disabilities. And so I think that is part of probably what helps shape my mindset towards allyship. I say with quotation fingers that you can't hear while you're listening to the podcast, but it's helped me, or it's shown me the beauty in every single person, and that every single human experience is valid and deserves to be honored.
Mm.
So yeah, I can think of tons of people with disabilities because that's all I do. Like today, I took a group of kids with disabilities out after school programming, and tomorrow I'm taking 8, 9, or 10 of them out hiking in the mountains with a buddy of mine. So working with people with disabilities has been my entire life, and it's kind of framed the way that I think about stuff and that I approach stuff. Um, and just seeing that every single human experience, from someone who might be nonverbal and in a wheelchair to the most gifted, eloquent person in the world, that all of those, and not to say that that is the range of human experience. I'm just giving two different examples. I'm not saying that one's better or one's worse, but that both of those experiences are equally valid and equally important and have equal amounts of meaning to myself and to everyone else, and that they contribute. Um, and so I think that the me working in disabilities has definitely shaped. I know I keep saying the same thing over and over again. Sorry.
Don't be. I'm happy you do. I was on a podcast panel today at the podcast summit, and I had met somebody new. Her name is Camille Craig, and
Mm-hmm.
they do a ton of tech work behind the scenes when it comes to plays and such. And was telling us about Inside Out, and it's a theater company here in the city, and apparently they like are people with disabilities, and they want to have the audience with people with disabilities. And yeah, so I'm like, well, now I'm gonna have to not just follow you, but get a yearly subscription to your
Oh,
plays and
cool.
go from there, because now that I'm understanding it more, like disability is everywhere. And I heard a quote a long, long time ago, sorry, and it's that you're only um able-bodied temporarily if you were like if you were born that way. Um and realizing now, like this whole time I actually did have a disability that was undiagnosed. And that has kind of shifted the way I look at things too. That, why is it a little Native girl's disability could have been so easily overlooked? You and I know that answer, but, it's that bigger picture that if it's me, and I know lots of affluent white women who are saying on TikToks and such that they went through the same thing. So it is also gendered violence to be denying us, access and services and resources. So yeah, a lot of things to think about there when it comes to allyship. As somebody who identified as able-bodied for so long, I try to think about that as more, and now with the whole autism and ADHD. I was telling the story today at the Pod Summit that on Facebook there's kind of a conversation going on about mean girls, especially native mean girls. And,
Hmm.
I think it's funny. I haven't commented or shared any of it because, as somebody who's understanding now what burnout and masking is, and realizing for so long I was masking to not just the colonial gaze, but to male gaze, and understanding that this is what, was giving me a lot of tension and misunderstandings. And I would loop conversations over and over again, and understanding all of this now, um, I just wish people wouldn't be so judgmental about the smile. I truly believe the smiling in people's face was something that was taught by colonialism. Um, I hope I'm wrong, but I'm trying to research it now, and there's such little research for Indigenous women with autism or ADHD. So that's kind of, I think, going to be my next hyper focus for the next little
Awesome.
while. Yeah, because I have a 17-year-old, so I need to arm them with every little thing I can before they are 18 and flying out of the house. And I don't want to kick her out ever, but they may wanna go.
Fair. That's a tough chapter.
Yeah.
Uh, what? Sorry, I just wanted to jump in really quickly, and I wanted to say that I think just jumping back to allyship and just listening to you talk there just reminded me of something that I wanted to say today, and I think that it is the most important part of that allyship part is just listening and taking every opportunity to grow and learn. Right?
Yeah.
Is like I said, I grew up in a super homophobic, super transphobic, white Christian, Dutch private school, right? My parents were the liberal parents in the group and the most left leaning parents in the group of kids, but still, I grew up in this super regressive community. And the only way that I can change that is by listening and being willing to learn and being willing to grow. And I think that's where a lot of people who look like me get into trouble is the second that they are challenged and the second that they are told that they are wrong. Every single person in the world, I don't care what your sexuality is, what your gender identity is, what your race is, what anything, we all hate being wrong.
Yeah.
However, what we really need to do is learn to be comfortable with being wrong, especially when we're approaching things from a place of privilege, because more often than not, we are wrong. We have just skewed the worldview to line up with our identity, and we haven't even realized that we've done that. And there might be people who, for some reason, have gotten this far into the podcast and do not align with your views and are hearing this and are going, no, that's completely not about me. But it is. And you need to be okay with that. And you need to slow down and you need to be comfortable with being wrong and listening and being called out. I've been called out by you in the past. I've been called out by other people in the past. And I personally love that. And I haven't faced any of that cancellation that other people have are so worried about and think is going to happen, because when you are willing to listen and be wrong, you don't get canceled. You only grow.
Mhm.
I'm going to continue for the rest of my life saying things that are inadvertently homophobic, but I won't say them a second time,
Yeah.
right? Because I'm going to learn from it when I'm called out. And I'm going to say things that are racist because I'm not aware that something I'm doing is racist, right?
Yeah.
But when I'm called out on it, I'm going to take that as a learning moment. And to me, that's another big part in allyship is being comfortable with being wrong
Yeah.
and having a person that you can sound off with. For myself, it's my wife, because there have been times in the past where I go, hey, this just happened to me. It's garbage. I'm mad. And she goes, okay, sit with that for a little bit and then we'll talk. And then like 15 minutes later, I go, okay, so this is what I'm feeling. And she'll challenge me and and then I'll go, yep, no, I know. I got to go back to that conversation and approach it in a different way. But
Yeah.
for me, it's really just about sitting back, listening, and taking every opportunity to hear other people's perspectives, because we surround ourselves in this comfort of being right. And that's no way to grow.
Yeah. No kidding. Well, and I like being able to just kind of parse it out a bit because I was at the summit and I seen, like there was only going to be one DEI little conversation. But I know
Mhm.
the organizers have like, at least three members of a local Indigenous podcast, like with an actual Treaty 7 member right
Mm.
there. And I was just like, why aren't they sitting? Why isn't one of them sitting at every panel? So like
Mhm.
those were the kind of the feedback things I was going to give them. Don't get me wrong, I have way more other positive things to say, learning a lot, inspired a lot. Yeah, I heard a fellow with CF. He does Sick Boy podcast.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
yeah, apparently he's really well known. He's out in Halifax. So, um, yeah, it was really interesting hearing him unpack what that meant to him. So, some really inspiring folks to listen to that's way outside my bubble of what I'm, used to hearing from folks. And, but, again, white male, there wasn't that many folks in the audience, and those that were all women. And so I was like, this is interesting. So I'm really
Mm.
curious to hear at the end, or maybe tomorrow because it's Saturday. More folks will come. We'll see. I'm really curious to see how that works. But yeah, excited to be doing it and seeing what people think is allyship. And you can always tell through a land acknowledgement. Like I've heard some really great ones that are like, and we are the oppressed and colonizers, and we have calls to action to do and calls to justice to do, and land back, and like
Mhm.
real land acknowledgments as opposed to pretty superficial. Oh, we acknowledge the natives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The two sentences that you have pre-written out that you say before every single time you get up. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, mispronouncing the nation's name, oh my god, it was horrid. So yeah, some things are tougher than others when it comes to allyship, and here we are coming to Reconciliation Day, and I wanted to ask you, like, from 2015 to now today is 2024, like, we're almost talking 9 years. Well, what has
Mhm.
the last 9 years been like for you as a, white Dutch, Canadian that you're like, "Yeah, this is a big shift," or what however you view that.
I think that there has been a shift in the dialogue, at least from the media that I consume and from the people that I speak with, and I think that it's a good thing. To me, it's
Good.
analogous to the shift in conversations about mental health in general, right? Like that these were just things that weren't spoken about before. I remember from my own battles with mental health that at the beginning when I was going through my own struggles with mental health, I didn't know anyone else who was talking about it.
Sure.
And that's kind of the same thing to me with reconciliation. Now, I'm not sure which path along actually accepting people with mental health or actually working on reconciliation. They're both still quite lacking. However, the dialogue is at least beginning and it's becoming part of our cultural zeitgeist. Is it moving to we not working hard enough on our calls to action? 100% we are not. Um, Hopeful that through this dialogue through what is now being instilled in our children, that hopefully this conversation starts to shift. I think to it's the same thing with sexuality and sexual orientation and growing and stuff like that, and the stuff that conservatives are all scared of is kids nowadays. My son, just because of the culture that we're raised in, and again, there might be people listening who go, "This is so horrific," but my son, with us, by the way, we're having a baby in a few months, but my son goes, "I might have a brother or a sister or someone else." Right? Like, but that just already that a 4 year old's mindset is going, it doesn't just have to be a brother or a sister,
Yeah.
right? And so ideally, we're going to start to see as we're raising kids in schools and talking about reconciliation and stuff like that, that we're going to have different conversations about how our society was actually founded. And in doing that, we're going to have more positive dialogues and back and forth between community members like you and myself, and other people from different reserves or from different communities around wherever you live in Canada. That's hopefully going to lead to true healing and growth. Because I think that that's, again, reconciliation is working on the calls to action, but also building a loving community between everyone, right? The colonizers who uh, I would I would like to be able to go back to Holland, but I've never spoken Dutch moment in my life, right? So like,
Yeah.
how can we reconcile and make this work in the best, healthiest way for all parties without anyone feeling um, like they've been harmed in any way? And that's hopefully going to happen through our children, right? And my generation, the millennials, I think started that ball rolling, and we're seeing it rolling even quicker with Gen Z, and Gen Alpha, I think, is going to continue that. So for me, things are moving in the right direction, and there's a lot more conversation about it, and a lot more nuance in it. And through the work that I do and the trainings that I've had and the opportunities playing on that basketball team, but also working at a school where we were very close to Sutina, and I got to go to the buffalo paddock there. Like, these experiences and the communities opening up and welcoming people who felt safe with me, that growth has happened for myself personally, and I think that will there's ripple effects around every person who puts himself out there and is willing to have these conversations around reconciliation.
Amazing. Oh, I'm so grateful. I'm just glad to have somebody who understands it. And, we're talking before the podcast really started, and I was like, what does your hat say? And you told me a whole story about the community of a satellite community that's, has their Indigenous awareness events, and that you had bought it at one of the crafters. And what was the
Mm-hmm.
crafter's name, sir?
They are the Res Life, and they've got all this cool clothes. And so I bought one of their hats, and it says "Burn Sage, Sweetgrass, and the Indian Act." But I think that that's also something
Yeah.
that it's small and it could be seen as performative, but for me, it's not. It's by putting on this hat, I'm a big white man walking around the mall, walking around in society, and it just shows people that this healing and that this growth is starting, right? And it's so I think that's partially my role as an ally too, is to be that person that looks like a lot of the oppressors.
Yeah.
And so the oppressors are going to go, oh, someone who looks like me is willing to take a step outside that, right? And
Mhm.
those ripple effects are going to happen again, or to even build up that community. I was thinking about it today with my TikTok, and it's the one note that I wrote down, that the thing that I appreciated the most about being on TikTok and being a vocal ally or a vocal shit disturber or whatever I was the feeling of not being alone that I created in my own little community online. The feeling
Mhm.
of, like, in Alberta, we are told that we are conservative, we're told that we're hateful, and we're told that if you believe in society and wokeness and bringing people together, that you're alone and that you're the only Albertan who feels that way. But through my videos, I saw people connecting and talking and realizing that there are more of us in Alberta and there's more of us in our communities than we ever would have thought.
Yeah.
And now that I wear glasses, I don't get recognized as much, but I used to walk around and have people every day come up to me and go, thank you. Like, I don't feel so lonely out here anymore.
Yeah.
And think that that's, to me, like wearing the hat and doing those little tiny things, it just makes people realize that there's another way, or that if they're already doing that other way, that they're not alone in doing that,
Mm.
and that there's a community. Because once you feel like you aren't fighting this alone, you are much more convinced of your fight, and yeah, it just feels good. Community is a good thing, I think. Is
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to say over the last 3 minutes. Community good. Colton, there we go.
Now we have new merch for you. Just kidding.
There we go.
Right on. Is there anything else that you think we should kind of touch upon when it comes to allyship?
Just be vulnerable. Just be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And just know that, like, it's this I'm going to be racist for the rest of my life. But I'm not going to be intentionally racist, but I am going to, and that is, it's not okay, but it's okay that I'm going to be corrected when those moments come up. And my goal is have them be fewer and farther between. And
Mm-hmm.
if you really want to be an ally, just know that you're going to screw up and that you're going to have to reconcile that. And I know I already said that, but we see that so often with a lot of these people online who end up going so hardcore for Daniel Smith or Donald Trump, and you're like, a little while ago, we were pretty closely aligned. But it's because eventually they get
Yeah.
so tired of being wrong that they just go, fine, then screw all of this. But if
Yeah.
you truly want to be an ally and you truly want to make progress, know that you're going to be wrong every once in a while, at least for the rest of your life. And that's okay, because that's when growth happens. I saw
Yeah.
a comedian
Agreed.
say a little while ago, it would be wonderful to be conservative because that means you never have to learn another thing again.
Yeah.
Right. And that would be brilliant. I wish I never had to learn or challenge myself. It would be so much easier to sit on top of the heap of society as the privilege that was afforded to me just by being born, by having two white Dutch parents do something horrible 9 months before I was born and creating me. And that's my gift to society is two white parents made me, and I could live up there for the rest of my life, and that would
Yeah.
be so easy. But there's no progress in that. So challenge yourself, be wrong, be vulnerable, and be okay with the fact that your privilege is going to make you wrong, and then grow past that.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my God. You keep making babies with your beautiful wife, then, please. Because we need more parents raising their kids like that in order for us
Right.
to move forward, right? So that's what I want, that's for sure. And congratulations
Hey,
about
thank
your
you.
new baby coming. So yeah.
It's exciting.
It is exciting. I'm so happy for you both. So well, for your whole family for that matter. It's always
Oh,
fun for the kids too. So
they're pumped. They're pumped. It's going to be great.
that's awesome. Congratulations. And thank you for coming on to talk a bit about allyship with me. I just it's Reconciliation Day coming up, and we couldn't get enough folks to agree that John A. Macdonald School shouldn't that like
Hmm.
it's so performative to rename it. But when you see the racist quotes coming from that, or policing in schools, like it, hey, yeah, yeah. I'm like, why is this so hard for folks to, do allyship?
Hmm.
Write their MLA, talk to their MP, talk to their city councilor about whatever it is that is going on in the day that sounds wrong. Like today, this morning was anti counter protests to hate rallies against the 2S LGBTQ, and that was a national event. And
Hmm.
I had to get ready for the pod summit, so I couldn't go. But geez, I'm just like, why are we still having these conversations? So, it's to me, allyship is so much bigger. I wish the queer community would start advocating for the 231 calls to justice. I wish all Canadians would advocate for the reports. Like, we have tax money that goes to these reports. Like, I don't understand why more people don't want them implemented. And it doesn't matter what the report is. I don't care if it's like food quality inspection. Like, why wouldn't we put effort towards trying to implement recommendations from these, commissions, reports, inquiries, findings, all the stats, they're there. So I have a hard time making peace with why it is people struggle so much with allyship and doing that right thing, whether it's men advocating for women's body autonomy, or whether it's a child's right. Well, I had these UN um rights for children, human rights for children
Yeah.
on my wall for my daughter as they grew up. And I don't understand why don't people respect their children. So like there's so many levels of disrespect all over the place, and I'll never really respect and understand why that is. And I hope that people see these reports as solutions, and I can't understand why we don't put more effort towards that. So I'll keep advocating for them. And today, as of today, we've had 9 people that were killed by the police
Yep.
in Canada, that were all Indigenous, that were killed by them. In some cases, they were calling for help, and they ended up being murdered by the police. We also had a real horrible tragedy in the northeast part of Calgary, or of Alberta. We had the Red Rum Motorcycle Club Ride for Homeless had somebody swerve and kill at least 2 of their members that I know of, and some are still hospitalized. So, you know, um, it's been really hard hearing a Blackfoot killed right here in Calgary, Haas Lightning's family, up in Masquachis. Cody Lightning was the producer and director of Hey Victor. And so he's quite well known for a lot of folks who know anything about Indigenous media. So it's just so heartbreaking right now, knowing how much loss there is in the community and not seeing much for allyship. And man, I can't believe how many people I have to block on social media all the time. And the things that they say are so awful. And I know a lot of people have just decided to no longer engage on social media. So, and I can understand why, because it's just been infiltrated with so much hate. And
Mhm.
so my hope is I kind of wanted to throw a few things out at people. One of the rumors going around lately is that Indigenous men hurt Indigenous women. And there's a whole article that I put out there regularly to debunk that. Um, there's uh, police recommendations for the systemic racism in policing in Canada that was released in June of 2022. It was actually Brandy Morin who reshared it. And so I shared it again on all of my socials because I wanted to amplify it, which I think is a really good reminder. These are things that are already out there, not including the, 231 calls to justice and the section on justice in the calls to actions for the TRC. Like, I just don't understand why more people aren't doing more on that day other than, wearing a red shirt and maybe grabbing, some kind of cultural event. But geez, like that's what we need. We need people to be real treaty partners and understand what treaty is and understand that you wouldn't be here without that treaty and that we don't want to kick anybody away. We just want people to treat us fairly and equitable. And that's not what's happening right now.
And I wrote about this on my Facebook the other week. I think you saw it. It just reminds me that we all have this capacity for goodness and to build communities. And I wrote about the other week that I saw my Airdrie Facebook page was inundated with stories of this 14-year-old girl went missing.
Mm,
And for 48 hours, everyone's talking about this 14-year-old girl and where's she at? And random community members who have never once met this girl, they said, we're meeting at this high school and we're splitting out and we're canvassing all the neighborhoods around. And we're going through every single person's doorbell cameras and we're making sure that this 14-year-old girl gets home. And the police officers were out and everyone was coming together and they're going, where's this? Where's that? Who's singing this? Who's singing that? And everyone's collaborating to make sure that this girl gets home because that's the right thing to do. Because someone's child was missing and a mother and a father were heartbroken and
yes.
devastated,
Yep.
abused and scared. And 48 hours later, they found this child up in Edmonton and they brought them home.
Yeah.
And that's perfect and that's wonderful. And I'm not taking anything away from that because that's exactly what it should be. However, we don't do that so many times. I spoke about what happened in Winnipeg and how hard everyone had to fight and how an Indigenous premier had to get elected so that women's bodies would be searched for, right? Like you had to have real representation in physical manifestation in Wabkanu to finally get people to respect the desecration that happened to women's bodies. And why weren't they searched for? Because of the color of their skin. If these were little white girls, they would have been going through that. And I'm not saying like this isn't hyperbole. They would have, because again, we
Yes.
saw that in Airdrie. We saw how
Yep.
they fought for that. And we see how the RCMP went up to Edmonton and made sure that girl got home, but we don't see the RCMP's actions when it comes to the Highway of Tears, right? We are
Mhm.
seeing the disconnect where we are holding people to this different standard, but we all have this inherent goodness and this ability to do these great things, and we can collectively decide to do that together.
Yeah.
However, for some reason, we have been conditioned to stop caring about people who, whether they're sick with COVID and not wearing a mask and not wanting to get a vaccine, or whether they don't love the same way that we, for some reason, were told that you have to love, even though love is supposed to be one of these pure, beautiful things that has no boundaries, or whether or not it's someone who has the same skin color as you, right?
Mm.
I hate the fact that I know if my daughter went missing, she would be sought after more than your children would. That breaks my heart, and that is completely unfair. And I think that's again where a big shift in my mindset happened when it came to approaching this was at my baby class when my son was first born, and we had 10 babies, their heads in a circle. This was a week before COVID broke off, so we never would have taken that picture a week later. But we have 10 babies' heads in a circle. And I know that for some reason, two of these babies have a higher likelihood of success, and my son's one of them because there's two white male babies in that circle of 10 babies, and they're all potatoes. The 10 of those babies are all potatoes. We don't know if any of them are going to have any neurodiversity. We don't know if any of them are going to get sick. But I can, if I was to bet,
Yeah.
I could bet on these two babies having a higher likelihood of success for no reason other than their skin color and their genitals.
Yeah.
Right? And that makes no sense. So that's kind of shaped my perspective. But it's gross that we have this capacity for goodness, but we choose to shut it off. And that's what it is. It's an active choice. Sure, we've been taught these things and we've been taught to hate, but we are, as adults, right? Eventually you hit this point in your life where you have to start owning even the preconditioning that's been done to you.
Yeah.
And so if you were taught racism as a child, you have to unpack that because you have inherent goodness within you and you can do great things. And we need to start doing that as a society. We need to start being the Canada that I was taught we were when I was in grade 2, right?
Right?
Because I taught this big lie about how we're
Yes.
welcoming and loving and all this stuff. And it turns out it's just welcoming and loving as long as you look like me. And that's garbage.
I
We can
know.
do better.
I agree. Right now, there's so much anti immigration rhetoric. It just makes my stomach turn because, ultimately, I know that it's a choice to let who we let in. I remember when the Syrians were looking to get a bunch of refugees in, and then she had a town hall. I learned from this. There's a Catholic immigration service. They said they disproportionately always get 50% Christians across the world as refugees. So in
Hmm.
Syria, there's 90% Muslims. So of that 10%, we brought those ones in. Those were the only ones we were willing to bring in because, well, we brought in 50% Muslims. But
Yeah.
the point is that we still stack the demographics towards Christianity, right? At minimum half. And so I realize how much Christianity like is the nation builder of this immigration and a colonial project called Canada. And it continues to this day, right? Like we are going to give a yes to Christians over other religions. And yet, what did you and I grow up with? Freedom of religion.
Yeah.
Like, it's just such a false I've jokingly said this numerous times that, naively, I believed we could spark change. Naively, I believed we could do these things, so
Yeah. And it's hard because I do believe that we are moving in the right direction. However, the good and the bad of social media is yes, it allows all the not as intelligent, hateful people to find their group and continue to be hateful, and it allows the helpers to find their group and be. But it also it also amplifies all of these stories, which is
Yes.
good and bad too, right? Because
Yep.
I wouldn't know as much about Indigenous struggles without people being able to share their stories, right? And so it feels worse because we're being inundated with these facts that but these stories were there all along, right? And these stories were probably worse in my when my dad was my age, right? And when my grandfather was my age, right? These stories were much more horrific. We just weren't hearing these stories. So progress, I do fully believe we are moving in the correct direction.
Yeah.
We are just hearing more about the hardships, which is a good thing. And I think eventually it will speed up the level of progress and make for a genuine time of healing because we can't ignore the hardships, but it does feel really heavy and it does feel really hard because we are having to come to terms with and actualize all of the horrific things that have been going on all the time and are still continuing to go on.
I'm really grateful you're willing to talk about it. It was funny because on the pod summit, we talked a lot about how if you feel comfortable, you might not be learning. So my hope is people do feel uncomfortable when they listen and they do learn something new. And yeah, there was one thing that you had said that I'm like, oh, I know it was the Canadian Medical Association issued an apology to Indigenous people for the collective harm of the past and the ongoing work they still have to do. And I thought that was a great example, not just of allyship, but like in every podcast, I say, talk to your community association, talk to the organizations you're within, talk to sports clubs, whatever it is you're doing to make sure you're incorporating reconciliation. And I'm like, finally, a medical association figured it out. Thank God.
Mhm.
And so, like, those are acts of allyship that I think are important to, address all of the harm of before. And like we were talking about, your dad or your grandpa at that age. I mean, I would love to have more understanding of how harmful so many things were of the past. And like even for me, knowing the last Indian hospital closed in 1996, like that was a hard gut punch to me when I was watching that because even me, I still think because I was born in the city, I was raised in cities and towns that, things aren't going to be so bad for so long. And again, that's just that proximity to whiteness that I had with my dad. Because if it was my mom, I very well could have been in an Indian residential school and or an Indian hospital at any point in time in my childhood. And yeah, like I forget that privilege, that uh, proximity to whiteness with my father. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, and how that affected me. And so that even I'm like, wow, really shocked by dates like that. And but those are the types of things of allyship I think matter, is apologizing for the wrongs. Wouldn't it be great to see universities be like, we're sorry for hiring so many pretend Indians? That'd be one of
Yeah.
my favorites. Yeah. All right. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, Josh. I think a lot of folks in the world miss you. And so having you come onto my podcast, I think is an act of allyship because you are a really popular person in Alberta. So I'm actually quite
Well, thank
humbled
you.
you would come onto my podcast and be willing to, talk about allyship with us. So in hopes, what if there was one person who was listening and got it and went, "Oh, because I heard it from Josh. Yeah, I kinda get it a little better now," and are sending their apology immediately to nativeyyc@gmail.com. Just kidding.
Love it. Love it. And a $5 Cash App donation. There you go.
There you go, then I'll have to put that in the preamble. Oh, so I just wanna say thank you for coming on, and I'm gonna do my exit. I'll just I'm really happy that you're on, and I hope that other folks really question themselves about what they're willing to maybe listen to, watch, or read on September 30th. They're just, like, today there's a new report from the government that came out that talked about the barriers, the gatekeeping of the missing children and unmarked graves. And I shared it just today on some of my socials if you can't find it. But the hope is everybody reads that in the minimum for September 30th and hopefully, just hopefully, maybe see something they can hold their MPs to account for. So just want to say thank you for coming on. I hope people act. Reconciliation is not supposed to be performative. I hope it makes you uncomfortable. It should. It makes me uncomfortable. Yeah.
It's
Thanks,
hard.
Josh. Yeah, it
Thanks
is
for
hard.
having me. This was awesome. This was
Yay.
awesome. So fun connecting with you.
Oh, I know. I love having you. Um, so I wanted to let settlers know, like, it's not from a lack of free education. So, I've been running a book club since 2016. Our next book is this one here, Moon of the Turning Leaves. So I have promoted it a few times. I'm hoping folks who have read it would consider joining our book club. It's just a Zoom link. So it makes it very easy for folks with disabilities. And I always try to leave the captions on. And while we do record it, we give you space so that if you're uncomfortable with being recorded, we don't. And anyone who listens to my podcast with book clubs know that. So I just appreciate you all being a part of that book club. I know that the Settlers Book Club is a different date than mine, and she's just releasing her book list for that as well. So that might be a more comfortable place because, as you all know, I will call you out. And if you're in the Calgary area, please consider joining our Reconciliation Action Group. We really do try to advocate for the 94 calls to justice, the 231 calls, um, the calls to justice and the 94 calls to action, sorry. And those are things that we're focused on. And if we had more support, maybe John A. McDonald wouldn't be a high school today. But it has been a great learning experience for folks to see the colonial barriers and the gatekeeping that are purposely done to stop us from progressing. And I think it's important that settlers work harder on those policy changes so that folks like me who are trying to work on reclaiming our identity, reclaiming our culture, reclaiming our language, and just trying to live a safe life, maybe we could thrive a little. That would be great. So I'm proud that this podcast continuously gives solutions and includes cultural safety training and cultural first aid in all of them to create a safer space for Indigenous, people of color, folks with disability, and 2S LGBTQ to speak. Um, I'm just going to give an example of allyship just because when I say the acronym 2S LGBTQ plus, it was the Two Spirit that said, "We were here first, so put that 2 in the front." So I had to retrain myself to say that. So even though I thought I was being a great ally, to the queer community, like, the Two Spirit were like, "Nah, nah, nah, brah." Sorry, I was trying to be cool there, I know.
So
Now I owe you all money. According to the 2023 Quality of Life report from the Calgary Foundation, 88% of racialized Calgarians feel uncomfortable or out of place because of their religion, ethnicity, skin color, culture, language, accent, gender, and sexual orientation, which is up from 2022. Can't imagine how worse that's going to be now that we've had this Palestinian and Israeli conflict coming up as well. So, there's so much more folks feeling uncomfortable. 84% of racialized Calgarians believe racism, while only 66% of non-racialized Calgarians believe it. So find out who those 33% are, allies, and try to get that number up. And I'll work on the I guess it's 16% of racialized Calgarians who need to decolonize. Thank you to authors Cheryl Ward, Chelsea Branch, and Alicia Fritkin of heretohelp.bc.ca. They have wonderful sections on Indigenous people and why Indigenous cultural safety is something that you should care about. Their work, those cultural action tools are available. Please support work like that as a part of your reconciliation, treaty, and settler understandings. I'm just lucky enough to repeat and highlight them here. Internalized racism and lateral violence is another form of violence that marginalized folks experience by the structure of racism imposed on these lands. If you have some money, please give to racialequitytools.org. They have tons of resource files, and they have a section on what is internalized racism by Donna Bevins. And even me, when I'm feeling, when I have looping or brain dysfunction, the first thing I do is pick up a book and remind myself, don't gaslight myself. Here's the truth. Do's and don'ts for bystander intervention by American Friends Service Committee. It would be really great after we've had this murder by the Calgary police in the Carriage House Inn, had somebody done any sort of bystander intervention. What if he'd be alive today because folks chose to look the other way? I wish anyone following me on social media would watch the anti-racism organizational lead for the city of Calgary giving a presentation on the journey of becoming an anti-racism leader. We all can do this work together. Black Lives Matter activists Taylor McNally and Adora Nufor are being legally targeted. One of our queer friends they're also legally targeted. So please help out Stop the Stack YYC. Learn more about the racism in policing, and hopefully we can help support them too. Indigenous people have been talking about our issues, sharing our reports, sharing in reports, commissions, public hearings, just so it can be regularly disregarded. No more. Honor our words, honor the treaties, listen to politicians and their policies and platforms. If they don't recognize the marginalized in their budget with Gender Equity Plus, if they're cutting violence prevention programs and services, Indigenous education, uterus health choices, gay straight alliances, lack of human rights for migrants, immigrants, folks with disabilities, Know that your vote is directly negatively impacting marginalized people. Demand that they implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, the recommendations of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, the multiple reports about child welfare reform, violence prevention, now 231 calls to justice. If you're in Alberta, we actually have a Premier's Council on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and municipally, we have a White Goose Flying report. Denying these reports is a form of abuse called gaslighting. And I just have to say it one more time because we've had 9 folks in Canada be murdered by the police. There is a report from June of 2022 on systemic racism issues in policing. Why are we not holding our policing to more account on this? Our people are experiencing death because of racism, and all institutions from educational, justice, health, there are all these reports that say the same thing. Demand change from election platforms and politicians. If they don't understand colonialism, racism, privilege, and sexism, they have no business running. Should be understood by just beyond the political parties and local politicians, community organizations, sports clubs like the Canadian Medical Association issued this apology. Google articles on how non-Indigenous Canadians can become better allies. Also, the Calgary Foundation has a wonderful ally toolkit that you can download as well. So if anything resonates from you, have a look through that and see if there's something more you can learn. Um, Josh talked about this little girl that went missing in Airdrie, and I can tell you just my observations is that colonists, settlers, treaty partners will only share police pictures, and that is a huge barrier. I know a lot of people are worried about scams, but when I talk about the aboriginalalert.ca, like this is a real legit organization. And when I see people share the little white girl in Airdrie like thousands of times, and we're lucky to get 2 or 3 shares, like it's really obvious to us. So sign up to the Aboriginal Alert, sign up for the Missing Children Society of Canada, because they're doing a far better job at sharing that. And know that the Indigenous community is not going to share your Calgary police picture, your RCMP picture, unless we don't have any other place that we can get it. Because we don't promote policing because of the absolute horrendous racism that they perpetrate against us. 9 deaths in 3 weeks. Understand the gravity of the racism that we're facing when our children go missing. Sign up at the aboriginalalert.ca and the Missing Children Society of Canada. Share them. Ironically, I will share the RCMPs, the Missing Children Society, and the Aboriginal Alert. And because of the way digital literacy works and algorithms, almost always the settlers will share the cops, never the Aboriginal Alert, never the Missing Children Society of Canada. So no, I see you, not share it. It's not a judgment against you, it's the digital literacy. If you're not putting effort towards learning about things that Indigenous people trust, and you're not allyship here, you're not performing here. Um, we obviously have a horrible drug crisis that is happening. If you look behind me, you can see that I have my Narcan. As always, I encourage people to have naloxone kits with you at all times, like you would carry a Band-Aid. Give it out frequently. Get new ones, because if somebody's coming to your window to ask for $5, most 9 times out of 10 they will take a naloxone kit, or and I always carry Narcan with me. So, and I have to emphasize this. A lot of people have said, "Well, what if they get offended?" And I'm going to tell you this. I promise you, unhoused people watch their community die every single day from this drug crisis. They are the ones that would happily give them this medicine if it was available. And when you're houseless, it's really hard to have something like this on you at all times. So when they do, and they're willing to take it, please give it, because I have shared many times on my TikTok the barriers that I face trying to get Narcan sprays and naloxone kits. And if I, a sober, housed, suburban, bougie, native mom is experiencing barriers, imagine what it's like for an unhoused person trying to access this medicine. So I beg of people to give it out because, we have over 10,000 deaths in Alberta alone since 2016. That's way too many. Like 2,000 from last year alone, way too many. So we need to do better. And you all can support the USP all you want, but at the end of the day, forced recovery, you're contradicting yourself to be like, oh, we can't wear masks and you can't force vaccines, but you can force a person into a recovery jail. And they're not equipped to deal with Indigenous people at all. And the fact that everybody's okay with that shows your racism. So no allyship there, folks. So I'm just going to point it out because today's episode is about allyship and some of y'all might need these reminders. If you or someone you know is using substances, please don't use alone. If you are using alone, you can contact the National Overdose Response Service at 888-688-NORS for support. Download the Brave app, Doors app, or Lifeguard app. I strongly support Freedom's Path Recovery Society.ca, where you can go donate. They provide free one-on-one addictions counseling, group treatment for recovery in Calgary. They're queer-friendly and they're anti-racist. And as many of you have heard, I've been fully supporting Canada's first 2S LGBTQ plus addiction recovery center, stonewallrecovery.ca. I'm actually got a whole bunch of swag at Pride, so I'm dying to wear it on the podcast. If you're experiencing emotional distress after hearing anything I talked about today, and especially with the Truth and Reconciliation Day coming up, please know there's the First Nations and Inuit Hope for Wellness helpline at 855-242-3310. It's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's toll free. They also have a website, hopeforwellness.ca. If more related to missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit, you can call 844-413-6649. It is again 24/7 crisis line. And with October 4th coming up with the Sisters in Spirit vigils, October is a big month for us here in Calgary. There's going to be at least 2 events that I know of on October 4th, and the Justice for Jackie Crazy Bull Walk, I'm sure, will be coming up. So please look for these events. And unfortunately, we don't have, infrastructure. You have to follow us on Facebook. I share it on all my social media as well. So I also wanted to point out the 60 Scoop Indigenous Society of Alberta, ssisa.ca. Indian Residential School Survivor and Family Hotline is 866-925-4419. Kids Help Phone 1-800-668-6868. You can also text at 686868. Native Youth Crisis Hotline 877-209-1266. I can't stress enough to my Indigenous youth that might be listening. If I'm blessed to have you listening, you matter. I wish you all knew how much I love you. And I know that some days feel really overwhelming, but you are our next generation. And people tried to make it overwhelming so that, it's funny, we talk about mental health except for Natives all the time. And I need you to know you matter to me. I need you to know that there are aunties, uncles, even non-blood that are advocating for you. The LGBTQ youth line, it no longer exists, but you can text at 647-694-7275. You can also go to youthline.ca. For non-Indigenous, there's a distress center line in your area, usually a functioning 211, and the new national number of 988. You can also text 988, or you can go to 988.ca. The following are 2S LGBTQ crisis supports available in most areas across Canada. Toronto has this wonderful Indigenous-led crisis response pilot that's being led by the Two-Spirited people of the First Nations in partnership with 2 other organizations. So you can find out more at the number 2 spirits.org. and find out more about that initiative. I hope it's so good we do it national. My American friends, I see you. My husband wanted me to give a shout out to like all the countries around the world listening, actually, because we looked at the demographics and I just am so honored and blessed that you download us. The Two Spirit Identity in America, go to strongheartshelpline.org, 877, or sorry, 844-7 native or 844-762-8433. And a huge shout out to all my American listeners for the reservation dogs, watching them on the Emmys. They did us so proud. Pauline Alexis is obviously from here, so we are even more super proud of her. Itgetsbettercanada.org has tons of resources for 2S LGBTQ+. Just a warning for the QT BIPOC. I've seen some of the orgs in Alberta listed, and they sure don't practice anti-racism nor have Indigenous education. So you may want to try the MMIW line instead. Violence is my everyday reality. I actually just have outright said I feel hunted, and I've felt hunted my entire life. Every indigenous generation has faced it. It's self-care, how I take my power back. That's why I started this podcast. We said today at the Pod Summit, never has an Satu Dene woman ever taken the mic. And after I said it, I understood the gravity of what I had said. And I just can't tell all of the folks listening, if you're Indigenous, please make a podcast. Please start talking, tell your story. Tell us what you're interested. If you're just interested in mushrooms, I want to hear about it. I'm going to give a shout out to the Ancestral Science podcast that's right here in Calgary. It's a podcast that's Indigenous led, that's Indigenous issues, and it's a science. Like, it's wonderful. And we have Tellus Spark is going to have a mushroom night coming up in October for the Indigenous folks. So it's all going to be about mushrooms and mycelium. And, these are things that I know we're going to be at and we're going to be encouraging. If you care about horror stories, listen to that. It doesn't matter the subject. There's Indigenous comedy. And if you don't see enough, make your own, because that's what I did. So I want to throw that out there for folks. We need to hear more of you. So I just wanted to emphasize the constant surveillance of Indigenous people, our protest, our vigils, and our rights. I hope in the last 3 weeks you've seen this more than ever. So when we have our vigil on October 4th, with or without the consent of the city or Calgary Police, we're still going to do it. We could really use your allyship to help protect us and to support our families. Again, though, learn about being trauma informed. So I had an incident on my Facebook page where somebody claimed to be trauma informed, but still tried to shame the person to speaking kind to them. And that's the thing about being trauma informed. I love some really toxic, horrible human beings who have said massively terrible things about me and to others, using their platform in a really horrible way. But at the end of the day, I know it comes from a place of trauma. So I'm not even mad at them. I'm hurt and I have to process it my own way. But that doesn't mean that I don't understand where it's coming from. It's coming from trauma. So for folks who want to be allies to, marginalized folks, when we don't say thank you the way you think we should say that, you're not trauma informed, even if you think you are. So I hope that allyship includes learning what trauma informed actually is. Folks like me are dealing with so much gatekeeping. I'm actually trying to make a list from the last couple of days at the Pod Summit of all the gatekeeping that I've seen in that, not to mention my own internalized racism. I recently shared with you all that I prayed and prayed and prayed for a blonde, blue-eyed baby because I hated my skin so much. And it came true. My daughter said my prayers are powerful. So anyway, I just hope that folks understand all of these levels of oppression that we're dealing with, and just encourage folks to understand that external and internal racism is an everyday reality for so many of us. I want to say Masicho to my ancestors. To my granny, to my mom, what strength looks like through your example. Want to thank my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt. My stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through her Austrian family and roots, and teaching me not just to be a proud Calgarian, but to be an advocate for anti immigrant bias. It's through her I'm a second generation Calgarian. To my husband, oh my God, I embarrassed him so bad. Usually I leave the funny stuff for the end, but today I embarrassed him real good at the pod summit unknowingly, unexpectedly. Um, Jeremy Saunders is the host of this podcast called Sick Boy. I'm sure many of you may listen to it already. And he asked, is this better than this? Is this better than this? How many people have had the best orgasm? And I started clapping and I'm like, this is my husband. And so he just went beet red. Poor guy. But he also is producing and editing this show. He actually produces and edits 2 other shows, and he is going to start pushing more of that out there. So if you are somebody who is interested in podcasting, I think my husband may have some of the most experience here locally. He's my husband, my childhood friend, father of our child, and support down my journey of the Red Road. And he has witnessed decades now of racism and sexism. To our child, we are blessed to learn from you daily and honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. And I just hope my family will be proud of us in the future for discussing these things in a way that's not out there. I honor the Blackfoot and the elders as they've been so kind to me on my Red Road journey. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Blackfoot. Leonard Kenny taught me how to pronounce it in Satu Dene. My humblest apologies to all language keepers as I learn proper pronunciation. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. According to the podcast people, I'm supposed to say that way more. I don't know. I feel weird not just twice in a podcast. Isn't that enough? Anyway, thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can also send in your comments or your questions. I've gotten some nice ones and I post them. I also have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe, and you can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And again, can you please share what you like and what you learned, and especially for Truth and Reconciliation Day coming up. Last thing I want to do is like a touch grass moment inspired by Ryan Jesperson. There are a lot of dark things I talk about that we see on the media, social media. So touching grass is a great way to reconnect to the world and not focus too much on our screens. So I'd love to hear yours. Tell me yours. But I will tell you today, mine was speaking at the 2024 Pod Summit and talking about Indigenous representation. I think I've talked a bit about it throughout the podcast already. So I hope you can see that it was important to me to connect with other podcasters. And lastly, I always give side eye to those Calgary rabbits because they are so lucky I'm not tradish. And my beautiful cousin responded, or they'd be in my dish. Thanks, folks, for listening.